going on with Aunt Jemima's family?
Well, there's a lot of brands that were stereotypical brands. Frank, I always thought that Aunt Jemima was an image of a woman in the maid tradition. She actually has a family. She has a family in Texas. Let me express thanks to Shelley Davis for having done the research on it. And that family is now is in the center of things. I think that they deserve Barbara. They deserve
recognition.
No,
royalties, Barbara.
Royalties.
Royalties. Not just the positive, there's a royalties.
Yes.
Which goes to the heart of the question beyond this police thing is equity and parity in every American institution. Case in point, I'll come back to the minute, is that we were locked in apartheid during 1896, 1969, 1965. They discovered radio. All radio stations were delivered by lottery. We were not in the lottery because we couldn't vote. We just fight for our share radio stations. TV was developed during that season. So we had to go across the board on what we were denied, locked out of in the apartheid season. But the Aunt Jemima and Uncle Ben's rice are images that represent the tradition of servant, being servile. So we stand with that family as they seek to get repaired for their damage done. I hope it's not just an apology. I hope it is in fact a royalty. They've sold that for many years. Second thing is the issue of Juneteenth. My concern, frankly, Barbara, about the celebration of Juneteenth, two things. Number one, slavery didn't end that day.
That's right.
1969, the Clotilda, the ship was off the coast of well, they were still smuggling our people in late 1869.
That's right.
Even beyond that. I think that some of the Juneteenth celebration takes folks away from January the 1st, 1863. I for one, have been said that the breaking point of this thing was January 1st, 1863. I mean, the full weight of the government said, 6 years after Plessy, after Dred Scott, you're citizens. The full weight of the U.S. military behind you. You have the right. If you leave your plantation, they try to stop you. You can shoot your plantation boss.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot. Sound a lot. You can join the military. 200,000 blacks joined the Union Army, and Lincoln freed us. We saved Lincoln. We saved the Union.
That's right.
We beat the South back in Antietam. We beat the South back in Gettysburg, and so we have and so the day that we became citizens first was January the 1st. And most people they must read who are watching, Google the Emancipation Proclamation. It's strong language, very clear language. We can man vessels, join the Navy. You have some case where blacks got the ships and drove them to freedom. I mean, the dynamics started, and so Galveston was because, in some sense, it was away from the battlefield, down the lower end of Texas. Battlefield was kind of south and southeast, Barbara. You follow what I'm saying?
Yes.
They got the word late, but my friends, the 13th Amendment is problematic to me because it all free except prisoners. Well, unemployed blacks became prey for the segregation masters.
Exactly.
They built whole prison farms, Angola and Poshmark prison in Mississippi. So there's a whole, in prisons are slaves. 13th Amendment is problematic. I have a problem with 13th Amendment, Frank, because of that gap. And we feel the impact of 13th Amendment today.
Yes.
As a matter of fact. So I would urge people to fight for Juneteenth. It has its place. But read the Emancipation Proclamation. Read it. Understand the dynamics of it. And if we lost Civil War, we'd been on 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments in the first place. If we lost the Emancipation Proclamation battle, it would have been the Freedom Amendments. Jefferson Davis would have won. the Confederates would have won. We beat the Confederates militarily. So don't miss January the 1st, 1863 as being a huge blow, because you could escape freedom plantations and get caught like Dred Scott and bring you back. After the Emancipation Proclamation, you could get the freedom. They couldn't take you back. Dred Scott would not have been taken back after January 1st, 1863. The dimensions of, and sometimes we get Reagan, Lincoln, who his politics were, he ended up on the right side of history. And of course, there's the Tulsa thing we talked about someday, Brother Mark, where in the season of lynching, 1860 to 1950, 5,000 black were lynched. There's Tulsa, there's Rosewood, Florida, 2 years later. They massacred whole towns of people, sundown clauses, all that. This is a cruel period. Tulsa is in the light now because Trump is going out there to do his. I've urged people to don't go to his rally because I think some people there more they need a riot, and they may shoot somebody to prove their point.
Right.
As a provocative back. Of course, reparations said to repair for damage done. I think we got to deal with that because I can't get my arms around the 240 years of slavery in terms of a cost. I'm sure someone has worked it out. But 1896, 1965, I'm clear we were denied. We were separated by race, separated by resources. For 69 years, we were trapped under states' rights. They had the right to vote, conservative juries. America developed in the fundamental ways since 1896, 1965. It developed radio, television, athletics. The whole world developed in 1896. So we really can get our arms around the apartheid season of pleasure be first. So I'm excited about being with you today. And Mark Thompson, sitting in MSNBC earlier today, I'm proud of you, Mark. And thank you, Shelley Davis. Brother Todd Yeary should be on momentarily. Brother Ray is at Brookings Institute, taking care of business. Love you guys.
Thank you. Thank you, Reverend Jackson. We always appreciate your eloquence, and I am thankful that I've had the likes of you as my elder and Shelley Davis as my other elder to look up to and to be mentored by. Amen.
Shelley's my elder too.
Right. We both looked up to Shelley. Amen. And someone else who's looked up to Shelley, we're going to hear from first now, Dr. Ron Daniels. Ron Daniels is the convener of something we have now, the National African American Reparations Commission. You can go to reparationscom.com, reparationscom for commission, COMM.com. A major Juneteenth forum on last night, a big success. HR 40 is a big part of that. Sheila Jackson Lee was on with us last night. She'll join us here a little bit later in a short period of time. But let's open with Dr. Daniels. Dr. Daniels, at this moment in history, and Reverend Jackson has just talked about Tulsa and talked about Juneteenth. There is no better time than the present to have and enliven our call for reparations, is there? Dr. Daniels, there you go.
Yeah, I see myself. Yes, but before I do that, let me just first of all pay homage to my leader, the Reverend Jesse Lewis Jackson. Not only ran for president, but paved the way for presidents. The first African-American president. I was honored to serve as executive director of the Rainbow Coalition, deputy campaign manager, one of the great experiences of my lifetime. I also want to invoke the name of Dr. Conrad Worrell at this moment, because Dr. Conrad Worrell was a fearless warrior, organizer, and a charter member of the National African American Reparations Commission. And I want to recall, Reverend Jackson, that in April of 2014 in New York, you were there for the first meeting of the National African American Reparations Commission, as we rallied literally hundreds of people in New York. We brought people from over 22 nations from all over the world to establish, again, the National African American Reparations Commission. So I just want to have you remember that. You made a memorable speech on that occasion, and you've always been on the case for reparations. So, no, Juneteenth is it's not just that it's Juneteenth, it is what is going on at the moment. As you have said, it is not only the COVID pandemic, it is the police murder pandemic. And all of the things that have been exposed by this moment in terms of the disparities, in terms of the inequalities, and in terms of the long-standing history of our oppression, which Reverend Jackson referenced. Ever since we landed on these shores, we have been under police surveillance, police oppression from the very beginning. And there's a way in which, in some ways, you know, it has become normalized. Of course, Michelle Alexander pointed out in this most recent period that, you know, it's no accident that we're being over-policed, because the new Jim Crow talks about, you know, the fact that the war on drugs has been a war on us. So this is the moment to push. And let me just say that Juneteenth is getting popularity now. I agree with Reverend Jackson that, you know, Emancipation Day is the more fundamental day, but I'm always one who thinks that we can do, it's not either or. If I had my choice, I would push for January 1st as a holiday. But it begs the question, why haven't we been doing that? I mean, in my church, I'm always pushing. When I grew up, Emancipation Day in the Black community was a big day. It receded. So in a real sense, part of this is because we have not ourselves pushed for it. So I don't think there's a contradiction between these 2 days. I'm glad that many more people are now learning history and so forth. Juneteenth is everywhere. The red, black, and green is flying. So we seize that moment and we move forward. And I guess my final thing is this. I don't want Aunt Jemima. I don't want Uncle Ben's. I don't want any of that. But at the other end of the day, I would rather have my choice. We want reparations. Because at the end of the day, we can get lots of symbols wiped out. We saw in Florida, Nikki Haley was celebrated for pulling down the Confederate flag. And then she went on, as you would say, Reverend Jesse Jackson, and then implemented apartheid policies. So the symbolism you can have people who get really happy about, you know, we did this and we did that. We want those companies to come up even now, you know, and begin to talk about how they can repair the damage. And I guess I am lying. I'll say one more thing. Tulsa. How is it that for almost 100 years, the greatest mass massacre and destruction of property in the history of Black people could have lingered that long? So there is a place, a sort of a symbol that we ought to be fighting for. It is to make sure that that our ancestors, in fact, in that form we had, their blood cries out for reparations, and we ought to be absolutely fighting to make sure that if there's any place at the local level other than federal, it ought to be Tulsa, the resurrection of Black Wall Street, and make our ancestors dance again, because they have been forgotten for too long.
May I say this, Dr. Daniels?
Yes, please. Go right ahead.
For too long, a distinct minority of people led you run, Daniels, miss these moments in history. The media kind of controls our agenda in some sense. We got to bury Wall Street, Black Wall Street, and with it, and Rosewood, Florida, the massacre in 21 in Tulsa, 23 in Rosewood, Florida. There are other massacres as well. I'm also concerned that with all the folks on the police, Ray, police patrol, they don't control. And when many people who are freedom allies may not be our equality allies. They march because the lynching of George Floyd embarrassed them. It embarrassed them. Humiliated us, it embarrassed them. And there are those who wants to get a few police reforms, kind of jump the police, will go right on. But the real deal is Janice, is those who control, not just those who patrol. I access, I share radio stations, I share TV stations, I equity and parity, which was denied during the apartheid season. I think that the pleasure was worse than Dred Scott. Dred Scott was honoring slave law in slavery time. They didn't go beyond the law. Pleasure comes up with an apartheid thing, separate us by race and resources. We didn't have the right to vote, serve on juries. America developed in a big way down to 1965. And Pleasure locked us out of all of that. So there's a lot to be said now. But I want to thank those who have struggled in the Mr. Michaud on the corner in Brooklyn. A handful of people, African American, not just colored, Negro, and Black. Always been somebody making this case for us. And I think it's coming full scale now. But I'm glad that there's a revolution going on now. We must control the agenda of the revolution. Because if you get, how can I put it? Effort and hard work and excellence means a lot. Access and inheritance means more. So you get to march about the police, 20,000 auto dealerships, 300 African American. It's a big deal, locked out of the automotive industry. It's a big deal what we're locked out of during that season. Everybody who's on football happy, 1933, 1945, 46, Blacks were locked out of the NFL. We were already in it as coaches and all players. They locked us out of the league for 13 years. The Bears won the championship in 1948, Janice, with $19,000 deficit. You could have bought a team for $500,000 at that time. We locked out of the industry, so we own a basketball team, no football, no baseball team. So I am rather convinced that what we're locked out of during that season, one can really get the one's arm around it. You land on an airplane, if you land in Tulsa, New York, LA, there's not a Black building on Skyline in America today. They have one with JPC in Chicago, that's gone now. So the idea of having our share, and Mandela didn't go to jail for nice police in apartheid. So if we set up a nicer kind of police, we still will support. Thank you very much.
Good points. Thank you, Reverend Jackson. And thank you to Dr. Daniels. We want to acknowledge others who have joined us, and I thank Dr. Daniels for also acknowledging a dear friend and comrade in arms with all of us, Dr. Conrad Worrell. We've been joined, who passed away, we've been joined now by Dr. Janice Mathis, the president of the National Council of Negro Women, also former executive director of the Rainbow Push Coalition in Atlanta. We welcome her. And also Harris County Commissioner Rodney Ellis, also a former Rainbow Push Coalition board member. We welcome them both. I want to go next to our brother from the Brookings Institute, Brother Rashawn Ray. We've kind of set the table in terms of topics, including Juneteenth, including Tulsa, including reparations, Brother Ray. So talk to us about how you see things and how you see our people being engaged in all of these issues on this Juneteenth.
Well, Reverend Thompson, it's great to be with you all. Reverend Jackson, as always, it's great to see so many people who I've come to know, Shelley, Dr. Yeri, Barbara, also my Brookings colleague, Dr. Andre Perry, who you all will hear from later, who has a new book out called Know Your Price that he'll be talking about that I think forms a lot of what the basis for what we're talking about. It's a must-read book. And so what I want to spend a few minutes on is talking about why Juneteenth is a rallying cry for reparations. So there was a recent video that went viral by Kimberly Jones, and she said, "They're lucky Black people are looking for equality and not revenge. They are lucky Black people are looking for equality and not revenge." LeBron James echoed her sentiment, saying, "Kimberly, I'm here for you, and more importantly, I hear you and will make change for us. I will not stop until I see it." Jones's words seem like the type of statement that we would have heard a liberated Black person make on one of those Juneteenth days in Texas. And as we've heard on June 19th, 1865 in Galveston, Texas, we know that Black people learned of their freedom. So as we think about Juneteenth is a holiday that all Americans should truly celebrate and embrace, which of course chronicled the end of the most horrific racist chapter on our planet, the brutal and deadly enslavement of Black people in the United States, the 12.5 million who were brought to the Americas, and in 1860, the bodies of Black people that were worth $3 billion, more than railroads and factories put together. Now we know that corporations to universities, from Twitter to University of Maryland, where I'm at, are finally commemorating this holiday. However, and in doing so, they're giving employees a day off to reflect, educate, and heal. But similar to MLK Jr.'s holiday, maybe we need a day on might be more appropriate to continue to embark on this next chapter of America's racial awakening. But Americans have a long way to go to truly be what I call racial equity learners. For many Black Americans, bondage didn't end with Juneteenth. Rather, shackles and whips were exchanged for handcuffs and batons. Picking cotton was exchanged for railroad chain gangs during convict leasing, which in states like Alabama, convict leasing made up 75% of their state revenue. So in that regard, we simply seen slavery by a different name. It was just replaced. And we know that subpar education and housing has continued. And for many, Black bondage has continuously been repackaged in a different wrapper, like a company that simply changes its name when it has a scandal, kind of like Aunt Jemima. And one of the things we know is that Black people are 3.5 times more likely than whites to be killed by police when they're not attacking or have a weapon. As Reverend Jackson just put it, police should patrol, but instead they're simply controlling. And the data overwhelmingly show that what police aim to do is to control Black people's bodies rather than protect, serve, and create the peace. We also know that Black people are roughly 3 times more likely to die from COVID-19 during this pandemic, but Black people are 6 times more likely than whites to be turned away from hospitals for COVID testing. So while people are talking about people in the street protesting, what I always think about is how bad does racism have to be to put your life on the line during a global pandemic to protest police brutality on the streets? That's how bad racism is to Black people on a regular basis. And of course, these disparities shouldn't be surprising. They are structurally predictable and baked into the land that our ancestors pruned and bled on, and manifest in where we live and the schools that we attend. As you'll hear from my Brookings colleague, Dr. Andre Perry, houses in predominantly Black neighborhoods relative to similar houses in white neighborhoods have nearly $50,000 less home value. And we also know that non-white school districts compared to predominantly white school districts receive $23 billion less in funding. So this sentiment that some kind of way that Black neighborhoods are getting a whole bunch of funding, that goes against all of the empirical research that we know. And we also know that it's an empirical fact that many average Americans are living great lives because they have received economic catapults that shot them out of a rocket. These catapults have systemically evaded, historically and currently evaded Black people due to racialized and structured failures with social policy. 40 acres and a mule, a miss. The New Deal in the Great Depression, a miss. The payment protection program during the COVID-19 pandemic, a miss, as Dr. Urey and Reverend Jackson and I have written about in Newsweek. But despite these disparities rooted in structural racism, Black people have always persevered. And that's what we should highlight on Juneteenth. And I think it's just important to highlight a few of the inventions that Black people have came up with that have changed our lives. Black people have invented the X-ray spectrometer, the folding bed, the ironing board, the gas mask, the rotary blade lawnmower, HVAC systems, the heart pacemaker control unit, home security systems, the wooden golf tee, amputee feeding devices, the super soaker, the refrigerated truck systems, video game cartridges, whiskey. All you got to do is look up Uncle Nearest. That'll tell you that story. Lubricator for engines and electronic elevator doors. Black people made all these accomplishments during slavery, Jim Crow, and mass incarceration. Imagine if racial equality and racial equity actually existed. And imagine today if Black people weren't less likely to receive patents and less likely to receive the payment protection program funding. So look, as we celebrate Juneteenth, we have a long way to go to make up for Black plight since 1619. Black people's Americanness has never truly been acknowledged. We fought in every war and died to defend a utopian way of life that we've never truly benefited from. We love America, but America has never truly loved us back. And when it comes to reparations, that's the only pathway forward for true racial equity in the United States. And as Andre Perry and I have written, reparations for descendants of Black slaves must include education grants, housing, down payment assistance, and revitalization grants, and small business grants. Thank you for your time.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Ray. Thank you for your expertise and your input. Very, very timely. Folks, obviously we've got to look beyond what the media is covering and what we're seeing on the surface, because eventually some of these cameras are going to go away and the popularity and the media fascination will go away. We have got to be disciplined in terms of what we're going to do in this crisis. We want to hear now from the successor to the Honorable Dr. Dorothy Irene Height, another one of my mentors and obviously hers, the president of the NCNW, National Council of Negro Women, Dr. Janice Mathis. Dr. Mathis, on our topics today, Juneteenth, Tulsa, reparations. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you and God bless you.
Well, thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to be reunited with my rainbow family. I am, we might say, of the house and lineage of Jesse Jackson, that brand of politics and activism that so many of us of my generation continue to care for. Good to see you, Reverend, and glad to be here with you. And Shelley, thank you, my brother, for inviting me this morning. When I think about reparations, I think many of us were at the Congress when they held a historic hearing on reparations last year. Ta-Nehisi Coates, my good friend, Julianne Malvo testified. And I thought about, what does it mean to repair, to fix damage, to replace that which was lost? The problem with that for me logically is we haven't stopped losing. You can't repair, talk about repairing slavery. What about Jim Crow? What about this period of history that we're living through now? There are plenty of disparities and wrongs that continue. What is America willing to do to stop discrimination, stop the bleeding, stop the dislocations, stop the discrimination? You talking about paying for something that happened 200 years ago, 150 years ago. What about the children today who don't have decent schools to attend? The people today who get overlooked for employment that they ought to be, that they're qualified to hold. So I think we have to broaden the conversation beyond what happened in the past and address the future. That's one thought about reparations. The other is, what happened in those 100 years between 1865 and 1965 is easier to prove than what happened during slavery. You know, I had a question about who was a slave and who wasn't, and who was a descendant and who wasn't a descendant of slaves. If you were Black in America, you were subjected to Jim Crow. That's another point. I think about the book, Slavery by Another Name. I know people in Georgia who were just a little bit older than I am now, who had to sneak away from farms where they were held virtually as captives to grow cotton and corn and tobacco. I know a family that had to slip away one at a time by night and fool the white folk into thinking that they were still there. And they wake up in the morning and find out they were gone. I know a woman whose mother shot her plantation master, and this was in the 1950s, shot him because he was insisting that her children not go to school and went to pick cotton. I'm talking about stuff that's happening. Now, many of you all have not had the benefit of living in Dixie like me and Reverend Jackson. But the oppression did not stop. And so when I think about Juneteenth, generally speaking, freedom did not come with the Emancipation Proclamation. It did not come with the adoption of the 13th Amendment. It came when the soldiers got there with the guns to enforce it. So in South Carolina and Georgia, they followed Sherman to the sea as he marched through Georgia. because where there was armed guards, there was some protection against the worst brutality of the remnants of slavery. The Confederates didn't stop fighting. So that's one point. This is a bigger, broader question. And with the Japanese, it started with an apology. Reagan first, before he paid reparations to the Japanese internees, apologized to them. And in apology is a certain kind of recognition and acknowledgement. And I would submit that HR 40 is pending in the House. I wonder why it's pending. And I look forward to what our sisters in Congress have to say to us about why a Democrat majority House of Representatives has not already passed HR 40. We've passed HR 1, which would expand the right to vote and clarify what voting rights are, restore some provisions of the Voting Rights Act. Why can't it get a hearing in the Senate? So we're talking about remedying the past, but we also have to focus on what the present and the future will look like. So I'm delighted to be part of this conversation about reparations. Juneteenth teaches us something. Now, I don't believe in looting or burning or any of the more extreme behaviors that manifest themselves during this most recent uprising of Black folk in America. But what I know for sure about some elements of white America is until there is violence, until there is dislocation, no movement occurs. That's what Juneteenth teaches me. That if the troops are not there, you may or may not be free. You're as free as you are free to enforce your right to be free. So thank you very much for the invitation. I look forward to the rest of the conversation.
Thank you, Dr. Janice Mathis. And as always, we appreciate your expertise. We will stay in the realm of our Queen Sister Warriors, Sheroes, with another one, Dr. Barbara Arnwine of the Transformative Justice Coalition. Dr. Arnwine is only allowed to speak in forums such as these. She's not allowed in most pulpits because she would take the church from whomever the pastor is. So we're happy to have her here in this context. Dr. Arnwine, Juneteenth, Tulsa, reparations, and this upcoming election, I fear. What say you? God bless you and happy Juneteenth, Queen.
Well, thank you so much, Mark, for that introduction. Thank you for all that you do and all your amazing communications. And Reverend Jackson, what a pleasure to be with you again. You are our leader. We are so indebted to you for all of your amazing advocacy. You taught all of us how to keep going no matter what and how to fight. It's no accident, right? Everybody on this great panel, Rayshawn, Dr. Daniels, Janice, Todd Yuri, Ellis, everybody who is on this panel. It's no accident that this is what last year we were acknowledging the 400th year of presence of Africans in the United States under enslavement. It's no accident that on the 401 year that our people are in the streets and saying very strongly that this is the time for real, permanent, progressive change. What people are saying is that in this moment, can we really make it the movement that is required that will result in our permanently recognizing, confronting, and dismantling white structural racism? Is that within our reach? Is that within our capacity? And within that question is the question of how do you repair? Where's the reparations? Reverend, when you were talking about the history, one of the questions that plagues America is its failure, its absolute failure to be honest about its history. And its failure to be honest about its history is why we don't talk about Juneteenth. Because to talk about Juneteenth in its full context is to recognize all of the failures of America and its relationship to racial justice. It is to recognize that there was denial, right? And that's from the Constitution. The Constitution is laden with denial. Read that document and try to find the word slaves anywhere when it was founded precisely on slavery. You see within Juneteenth, deception. Deception was critical and remains critical to the perpetuation of white structural racism. If you look at Juneteenth in its fullness, you see exploitation, because it was the continued exploitation of African labor that was so critical for why they would hold off for 2 years telling people that they should not actually be in bondage. There is so much when you really unpack Juneteenth. Also, Reverend, we got to think back about, the great Charles Ogletree. When you talk about Tulsa, the great Charles Ogletree, Attorney Ogletree, started that lawsuit demanding reparations for the descendants of those in Tulsa. We still have not had the payment. We still have not had the repair there. And it's important that Attorney Adjua Ayatoro and others are pursuing a new lawsuit around Tulsa to continue this fight to demand. But I also want to just say two other things quickly. People forget that the Civil War, as you mentioned, Black troops, but remember the best role, the most important role of Black troops is post the Civil War. That once the war is over and white troops start going home, the Union Army becomes blacker and blacker. It is the Black troops in the Union Army who confront the Reconstruction Congress and demands the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. In fact, they demanded it kind of in another order. They wanted the 13th and the 15th. The 14th was intervening. And we should be clear that without that demand of Black troops, without their presence throughout the South, that everything that we know of it would look differently. And it was, our Black Union troops that were so critical, and we downplay their role and we overplay the role of the Reconstruction Congress, and we underplay the role of the demand that was made by Black troops. Likewise,
Barbara, talk a bit more about the Black troops. I'm learning something as you talk about their role in this.
Yeah, well, people just, Mary Frances Berry has written about this, and it's one of the few people who has written about it, which is the fact that post the Civil War, white troops could go home. They had a home to go to. Remember, the plantation system is basically destroyed, or let's say, it's different post the Civil War because our people have left. Remember that Harriet Tubman went down the Combahee River and freed 1,000 of us off of plantations. So the plantation system is having to regenerate itself. And it's all, in tatters because the Union troops are there. And the Black Union troops had nowhere to go because they weren't going back to nobody's plantation unless they owned some land. And as a consequence, all of these demands for land redistribution under the Union Army, all of these demands for the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment come from Black troops. They say, we're going to march on Washington if we don't get our amendments. I mean, people got to understand that Black men, Black troops have always, perpetuated and fought for the maximum amount of our freedom. And it was until the compromise, the horrible, compromise, Hayes-Tilden compromise in 1877 that said, send the troops home. That was the worst thing that probably happened for us, because then we were totally at the mercy of, white terrorism, because white terrorism was, insistent throughout the Reconstruction era. Don't get it wrong. It didn't stop in 1865, or it was, horrible throughout. If you go back and read the testimony before Congress, what was happening to Black families in 1865, 1866, 1867, it is horrendous. It is a story of massacres. It is a story of massive exploitation. It is horrible, those hearings, and I would recommend that anybody read them. So our record, our demand for reparations is so strong. I want to say that nothing's more important to reparations than the vote. I have been speaking about the power of the vote. It's no accident that it took until 1870 for there to be the 15th Amendment. It's no accident. It was the last of the Reconstruction Amendments. It's no accident because, be very clear, the fight for the 15th Amendment started in 1865, as soon as the Civil War was over, and it was a fight because the Reconstruction Congress didn't want to do it. Even the, quote, radical Reconstructionists. There were huge battles for years over the right to vote, to give the, quote, free men a right to vote. And it is no accident that to this day, that is the cornerstone of our battle. That because, full citizenship is the exercise of the franchise, right?
Barbara, expand, if you don't mind, a little bit on the 13th Amendment passed by a handful of votes.
Right.
Remember, the Union soldiers fought the Union, they didn't fight to end slavery.
Right.
It's important to understand that, I think.
And the Black troops were there to fight for to end slavery. That's the difference, right? Is that, and that's why there's such a hostility to Black men and Black people with guns, right? Because of that Union Army legacy. That we gotta, connect all of this. That's why the Second Amendment looks anyway. There's so much, for us to talk about, within this context. But I do want to just, say, Reverend, that on the right to vote, I want everybody to be clear that the most important thing that we got to do right now is to fight throughout this country for voter options. There's the Democratic Party is out of its mind talking about the only option is vote by mail. Vote by mail, frankly, can be manipulated worse than any polling site. And the result already that we're seeing is generally a 10% denial rate of the right to vote across the country. Maryland even, 10% the denial of the right to vote. New Jersey, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania's worse. You go down the line, Wisconsin, worse. The percentages, Georgia, worse. Because what happens is it's all in the process of using a vote by mail to apply to get the ballot, to actually receive the ballot, to mail it correctly, and then to have it counted correctly. And what we're seeing is high rejection rates. What we are seeing is the high never delivered ballots. What are we seeing is, a failure then to back up the ability to have people vote at the polling sites. So what we've been saying is that you got to plan this correctly. You can't base it totality on mail ballots, because if you do, in November, we'll see 25 million people disenfranchised. So what you got to do is base it on a series of voting options. You got to have vote by mail, of course. No excuses, no barriers, vote by mail. You got to have expanded early voting, because we know statistically that where early voting is available, African Americans will vote anywhere from 35 to 70% of their total vote will occur during early voting. That's how much we prefer early voting. The third option is you got to have what none of the states are doing well, which is drive-up voting. You got to have curbside voting. You got to have, ballot collection, You got to have, drop boxes. You got to have all of these systems. And the last thing is you got to have good, strong polling sites. You can't have just a few. You got to have a serious number, and you got to have protection, not only for the poll workers, but for the voters. In Georgia, what nobody's been talking about is that when they finally allow people to vote after waiting 4 hours and 5 hours and 6 hours that so many people went through, last 2 weeks ago, is that nobody talks about the fact that they didn't clean the machines. Those machines harbor virus if they're not clean, and they didn't clean them between voters. So voters need to have gloves. Voters need to have masks. Voters need to be protected. And there should, frankly, not be the use of machines because they're so hard to clean. It's better to have paper ballots. And Georgia did not have anything approaching adequate paper ballots available as an alternative. So these are some of the things that we can do. I am angry every time I see these headlines talking about states that are getting ready to vote and they don't know what to do because they're saying that they don't have enough poll workers. I'm saying, well, you got governmental employees, pay them the double time, the triple time, give them the hazard pay, let them go and be protected appropriately and people these polls. You know how to do this. This is not a mystery. And at the same time, there's other things that we should be doing. I can't go into it all, but I do want to say, everybody, this is an era. We are in a moment and in a movement. And the question is, without the power of the vote, our ability to vote full ballot, not just up top on the ticket, full ballot for these prosecutors, for all of these DAs, county attorneys, state attorneys, for judges, for clerks of court, for sheriff, for all of these, critical offices that have to do with law enforcement. As we're dealing with this pandemic of, racism and policing, which has been, of course, the core protection for white structural racism has been this outrageously evil, policing. But when you look beyond that method of racial control, if we're going to break it, we got to use our vote also to break it. And we got to be smart, in how we use that vote. So anyway, with that said, I just want to, thank you again for, letting me, talk today. I do encourage people to go to our website, votingrightsalliance.org, votingrightsalliance.org. Where we have a lot of this information, and to really, let's organize. And I'm so glad that we're working hand in glove with the Rainbow Push Coalition in this fight, and that we're going to fight for the next several months to get what needs to be done in these states done. And the RNC, watch out. We're not going to allow you to put 50,000 armed white vigilantes at our polling sites to terrorize our people. That's not happening. We're going to fight that, and we're going to win that fight. So thank you so much, Reverend.
Thank you, Barbara. Greatly appreciate that. Your ability to be able to explain our voting rights, what we should be doing, what's next, is vitally important, and we greatly appreciate that. Sounds like you have given me a schedule of what our next town hall should be, exclusively on our voting. On the voting rights. Next, we're going to go to yes, sir. Go right ahead.
One thing I like about Ron Daniels' work, he's been a scribe. He demands. I'm concerned about a media-driven movement without leadership that meets and strategizes. It's the thing to do. It's almost like a fad for a minute. And so, for example, I talked to a kid up in Minnesota about registering to vote. He said, "I'm not with voting. I'm not with the system. Blah blah blah." So you can't be on the jury to convict the killer unless he didn't realize that. The vote, Keith Ellison is transgender because we voted, and the first police ever convicted in the history of Minnesota for killing a black was by Keith Ellison. Paul Howden in Atlanta, Georgia. The conviction of the killer of Rayshard. So the voting is a militant act. It must not be something passive. Marching is a powerful tool. If you keep voting as a tool and marching as a tool, all you got left is talking that talk. So we must define the vote as a militant act, because there have been no people killed by police in these demonstrations. There are no shoot to kill mayors. The mayor of Atlanta, the mayor of Mobile. These mayors have chosen to let people over property. So Ron, we must keep defining that. Data says shoot to kill, and that's what the police did. Except the killing by Rashad, which was not a demonstration. No one's been killed, because we have black mayors in all these cities. They've civilized the process. So don't forget the vote is a militant act. And because somehow manhood a company was the militant thing. Some people think militant means cursing and screaming at white people. To devote them out of power is a militant demonstration, and voting are strong weapons. We must not see them as weak weapons.
Reverend Jackson, I hate to interrupt you, but I want to just add a brief point to say that there's been a lot of talk about qualified immunity as being a barrier, qualified immunity. We won't get rid of qualified immunity unless people vote.
Right.
That's the only way. Only the Congress. The Supreme Court last week decided they're not going to take up the qualified immunity cases. They feel it's a legislative problem. Let the legislature solve it. The House has a bill that would eliminate qualified immunity. The Senate bill doesn't mention qualified immunity. So if you want to get rid of qualified immunity, you have to change the composition of the United States Senate. It boils down to something that simple. And Barbara nodding, so I must be telling the truth.
Indeed. Thank you for that, Janice. Next, we're going to have Harris County Commissioner.
Shelley, can I just get a quick on this?
Sure, Dr. Daniels, go right ahead.
Because I really, really, really want to applaud Barbara Arnwine, Attorney Barbara Arnwine. And frankly, I'm disappointed when Reverend talks about the mainstream media. I mean, maybe I don't see all the news, but there's anybody who ought to be out there talking about voter protection and all that, it's Barbara Arnwine. She is without question our champion on this issue. And Reverend Jackson, I agree with you. I have said to people over and over again, we should be looking at this. We are marching on ballot boxes. If they put the polls 20 miles somewhere, we ain't gonna let nobody turn us around. We really need a kind of thematic, seeing this as a revolutionary radical act. And we have to be careful, because there's some people out here who are talking big time about reparations, by the way, who are saying that reparations cannot happen unless people decide that they're not going to vote for the top of the ticket. You know, and there's some black folks saying that. And so we got to be careful about that too, because this is one of the most dangerous moments in the history of this country. And we cannot have no foolishness out here around this question. We have to march on ballot boxes. If they're going to suppress, the wave is so strong that they can't suppress enough of us. So I'm just down with you, Reverend Jackson, on that point, and I
Well, I couldn't agree with you more, and that's why Transformative Justice and Rainbow Push has joined on this whole voting piece. So Barbara can add additional information for that for us at a later point, but we definitely have teamed up. She is an icon in that realm of voting. And so again, I'll say that Barbara has given us our marching orders for our next town hall exclusively on this topic here. So next we're going to have Harris County Commissioner, my mentor, that loaned me to Reverend Jackson some 20 plus years ago, Harris County Commissioner Rodney Ellis.
Shelley, thank you. Thank you. It's good to be with all of you. Reverend, you look great. I just love you so much. I know you've been traveling. You went to the funeral, so I know Miss J has you quarantining just to make sure that you are safe. And it's just so good to see all my friends, Ron and Barbara, Janice, Reagan. I see Houston's well represented. I saw Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee always working at her desk. Yuri got slick. He puts a nice picture up there when he steps off, and Perry there. But I just want to make a couple of points. One, I'm also glad to be having been a longtime member of the Rainbow Board, but I'm also representing the Conference of Black County Officials, and I got a text from some of my colleagues, and they said, we need to do one of these Zoom calls, which will be a long one. Reverend, I want you to come on there. Having been a long time state legislator and being a Texan, I just want to comment on how we got Juneteenth, Congresswoman Jackson Lee. The bill was introduced maybe before I even moved to Austin to go to grad school. But Al Lebowitz, who passed recently, Representative Al Lebowitz, God bless him, it was his bill. There was always a big fight, Reverend, in the Black Caucus on the state level. Now, I was just an intern at the OBJ school and at law school working for the lieutenant governor. And my job was mainly to bring the liquor and all that in. But when Mickey Leland and all of them would come in to do the meeting with the lieutenant governor once every session, there was a big fight over the Juneteenth bill because they were also trying to pass the Martin Luther King holiday bill. And obviously, some people who didn't want the King bill were willing to go with the Juneteenth bill. So here was the compromise. Mickey Leland was in his first term in Congress. Barbara Jordan left Congress, 1979, the bill passed. So here was the compromise. You had the option of celebrating Juneteenth in Texas. It went into effect in 1980, or Confederate Heroes Day, which was already a state holiday. And I remember being so angry, being the only Black person and just an intern on the staff. I remember the staffers saying, well, we know who will have to work on Confederate Heroes Day. But over time, we made Al's bill and that holiday something significant, and it has its rightful place. And there's a big effort to do it nationally. I saw Congresswoman Jackson Lee at a town hall meeting discussion on criminal justice reform that Mayor Sylvester Turner had at City Hall the other day. Senator Cornyn asked for it. At the deal, Sheila, Congresswoman, he mentioned when he gets back, he's going to put in a bill for Juneteenth holiday. And I could sense the Congresswoman was just, her teeth were just gritting, because what we want more than a Juneteenth holiday is a holiday from inequality. And that's why this discussion on reparations is so important. The figures I've seen would be that we would get from 1.4 trillion to, I think, the highest of 17 trillion if we had gotten our 40 acres and a mule back in 1865. Then that's not counting all the free labor. Whoever came up with 40 acres and the mule, I mean, I don't think that was based on economic figures. But look, this is a special opportunity for us. Whatever has lit this fuse to have so many young people of all colors all around the world doing, Reverend, what you've done all your life is exciting. It's a special time. But we've been here before. And my fear is if we don't get enough right now stuff done before this moment passes, it'll be a hurricane. I'm in Houston today. Something's going to come up. It'll be an election, and we'll be back to business as usual. Whatever hit this fuse, I just hope if it's Congresswoman Jackson Lee has her emancipation trail. You know, we got criminal justice reform. The House has a real bill. The Senate has cosmetic stuff. You know, we got reparations. We got Juneteenth. I just hope we figure out how we prioritize what we get done, so before this special moment passes, we can say we seized it and we did something with it. I'm glad to be a part of this discussion today.
Thank you, Commissioner Ellis. We greatly appreciate that. Guys, fortunately, we have Ms. Jackson Lee that is available now, and we'd like her to go ahead and come on. Congresswoman, are you there?
You can hear me, I know. Let's see if you can see me. What about that?
There we go. There we go. Thank you so much for joining us, Congresswoman. I apologize for the timing, but we greatly appreciate your input. We would love to hear about your House bill and its companion on the Senate side. I know that you have worked, been very diligent in the hearings and trying to ensure that we are at least able to have a conversation about reparations. So take it away.
I'm delighted. Thank you so very much. It is good to be with each and every one of you, and it is always an honor and a privilege to really be with the definer of economic reparations in this nation, and as the Reverend Dr. Jesse Lewis Jackson. He is a role model for me. He is the reason why I was successful in my first election, a baby member of the community, a real baby, and tagging on with Brother Jackson's stupendous challenge to America about whether a Black man could be president. Here I am, having won and having been put on the path of political empowerment by the Reverend Dr. Jesse Jackson. So I am grateful in Rainbow Push. And as I heard my good friend, my local colleague, distinguished commissioner, former Senator Rodney Ellis, it was Jesse Jackson from the economic perspective who challenged corporations, first from the Wall Street Project, but when Dr. King gave him the assignment about dealing with economic issues. I am grateful for that leadership. So I will try to speak with great, how should I say it, brevity, but that is very difficult for us lawyers. But let me try to dig in. And first of all, to thank Dr. Daniels. I'm trying to acknowledge everyone here. I see Rodney and Shelley and Judge Janice Mathis, my dear friend. So good to see her. It's a pleasure. But let me say thank the Commission on Reparations that Dr. Daniels leads and that I am so proud of in COBRA, and all of the advocates. Let me thank Dr. Julia Malveaux. We did a program last evening with Mark Thompson, and of course, Ife Williams and Joy Reid helped us. But let me face the issue of the commission to study, first to develop, reparation proposals and reparations and proposals is HR 40, the commission to develop, not study, reparations and proposals dealing with the history of slavery. Let me put this forward as a legal document. Commission is right. We have a wide purview in which to deal with. But if I can focus you on the idea, and I will do a little bit on the justice and policing, but let me focus on a legal document, which is what the premise of the reparations is. And we have to stop analyzing it in any other way, because in any other way, it will allow the detractors to ask the question, why? The legal document is based on reparations, repairing, and restoration. What are we restoring? We're restoring 401 years of inadequacy for the only group that remained in bondage more than 200 years. And that is, of course, the enslaved Africans, and now we are the descendants of enslaved Africans. However, the world is looking at reparations. You need to ask the brothers and sisters that were part of the transatlantic slave trade in Europe, brothers and sisters in South and Central America. And the legal document is based upon the premise that the government defined slavery, the government sanctioned slavery, the government indicated that we were not a person, we were not human, we were suffering human indecency. And so you could almost say that we were treated worse than animals, the cows and the chickens and others that were involved in this. So the legal sanctions, legal sanctioning of slavery continued on and on. We were defined as property by judicial decisions. But also, from the perspective of a worker, we got no life insurance, we got no workman's comp, we got no salaries, we got no sick days, we got no vacations. So there was a pile of documents, of dollars rather, that can be calculated if you look at it in that context. But what we're saying in this commission, which will be appointed by the heads of the House and Senate and the President of the United States, because it is a government problem. Please, when people turn their head away from reparations, they're afraid of reparations. I don't want to be seen with that. They are completely disingenuous, because if they were harmed in a car accident, they'd want to redress their grievances. So I am suggesting that intellectuals have to get their hands around this. Workers have to get their hands around this. Faith leaders have to get their hands around this. The broader beloved community, as Dr. King has indicated, needs to get their hands around this. Sorry, I've been talking all this with a certain kind of picture. I don't know how that happened. Anyhow, they all need to get their hands around this issue. And as we get our hands around this issue, then we should put it forward as a legal redress to a shameful period in our life. The other part of it is economic. We would not have been able to have cotton as king had we had no overhead, or at least it would have been less of a prosperous product with overhead. Means that you'd have all these thousands, a million slaves that you'd have to pay. We made cotton king. We built the economic engine of this nation, and cotton being king, we made the Wall Street basis. That was the foundation of our original money, was the export of cotton, which was relished around the world. And so we built the banks of Wall Street. We built the commodity exchange, and we received nothing for it. Now, as we travel through history very quickly, this is what Reverend Jackson was talking about when he opened up the Wall Street Project. This is what he was talking about when he challenged the corporation with no board members and no one looking at what and how African Americans can be engaged. Because yes, the 40 acres and a mule was a random number by General Sherman, but just think if 5 slaves had gotten together, 200 acres, 5 mules, mobility and property. So we could have developed a Ford Motor Company, put our money, invest our money, General Motors, Dell, Microsoft. We gained no inherited wealth. The most detrimental part of our life in this country was no wealth, which generated into no health care, poor education, housing. You know, wealth speaks loudly in this country. Just think if we had been a community of wealth, we might not have been integrated, but we would have been able to speak to the barons of Washington and said, now you better stop this redlining. You better stop this second-class citizenship, because we would have wealth. We never had it. And we remained stigmatized, 4,000 of us lynched. We came through the 20th century under Jim Crow. We died in the streets on the 1964 Civil Rights in 1965, just to go to a hotel and just to vote, and we're still fighting for that. The Commission to Study Reparations is the one stabilizer or the equalizer that must be passed. And if we don't get a unified voice on this, for people to understand this is not a hanging your head down concept. It is not exclusive to many good works that are going on. It is not the only solution. But if we get this commission, and if we don't go to sleep on it, and we demand the excellence that it evidences, then we get a complete analysis psychologically, sociologically, educationally, economically, and health-wise as to what the systemic response to systemic racism and the systemic reinforcing by the government of how you treat those who are the descendants of enslaved Africans. It translates directly to where we are, and I'm coming to a close on the Justice and Policing Act, another enormous step forward. It'll only go if African Americans, the descendants of enslaved Africans, again, don't hold their head down, don't stop when Rodney King's jury did not render justice on the officers, do not succumb to the attack of being against law enforcement. I reject it. We are the most law-abiding community you can expect. And when I call 911, I'm not looking for, no disrespect to Ronald McDonald, I'm not looking for him to come. I want law officers that are guardians. But I don't want Brother Brooks' circumstances murdered in the streets. I don't want our beloved Houstonian, George Floyd, his life seeping from him, crying out, I can't breathe, and crying for his mother, murdered on the streets of America. I don't want a young, potential, beautiful nurse, Breonna Taylor, gunned down in her home with a no-knock. And I certainly don't want, under color of law, vigilantes going after Ahmaud Arbery. It is because our lives are not valued. Justice and Policing attempts to take a legal document to build on the concept of repair and restoration and begin to say federally You can't do no knock. You can't do chokeholds. You can't have racial bias. You're weeding out these folks. It's going to take us, we don't meet with police departments. The only time we meet with them is when the call comes 911, or we're out there after the fact. Are you meeting with your police departments and demanding that they adhere to the basic human decency? You got to get people out that have racial bias. You can tell them right away. You got to deal, and this bill has that in it. This bill has a retraining dealing with the front end of excessive force, de-escalation. They could have sent that Brother Brooks home around the corner. The duty to intervene, nobody did on Brother Brooks, nobody did on George Floyd. Ending racial profiling, we've been trying to get that in forever. Ending racial profiling. Do you know we don't have an anti-lynching law? I want to give tribute to Bobby Rush. I know he's trying to work on it in a different way. It's in his bill. I'm with him on any way he wants to get it done. As I'm his sister, and I thank him for working all these years, and he deserves credit. Pattern and practice thrown out by Trump. Back in independent investigations. That if the slow poking local community is not working, then get going with the federal and state. Finally, you have to have your body camera on. Please don't tell me it fell off. I don't care what you have to put in it. Put steel straps on it. Leave your body cam on. It's a federal law. And then lastly, I would say that the thing that we've heard about qualified immunity, I don't want to put anybody in the crosshairs of being fearful of doing their job. But we have to have a pathway to address grievances and injury by those who carry the badge and the gun. And we've done that with modifying 242. And we've also ensured that misconduct is on a national registry. All of this is together. I see you, Shelley, and so I'll finally answer my good brother Commissioner. Yes, the holiday is one that I think is overdue making a national holiday, and that is Juneteenth, because we have one holiday of the beloved brother, Dr. Martin Luther King, that speaks to us, the descendants of enslaved Africans, and none that speaks to slavery. And I want my ancestors to know that I had enough courage to demand this nation honor their sacrifice even more. And once that play is in place, it'll be up to us to insist its somberness and soberness and holiness, and teaching people what this sin was and this stain was in this country, because we'll never get past it if we don't know it. I want to acknowledge Brother Roger Flowers. I didn't see you. Let me put my glasses on. But let me just say thank you for having me, for being part of this. I'm in the midst of testing sites. Let me get that over there, please, the mask. And so just for a little bit of, I'm like this, out there with the testing sites. Then I put this one on, okay? So I'm on the road, because Rodney always tells me I'm not doing what I'm supposed to do. I have my gloves on, but in any event, this is important. Reverend is important. Uh-oh, did I lose you?
You're good.
No.
Okay, Reverend is important. This is important. And Shelley, I thank you so very much for your leadership and your invitation. God bless.
Thank you, Congresswoman. We greatly appreciate it. And please be safe out there. As we know, COVID is still alive. We greatly appreciate your support and always being there for Reverend Jackson whenever he calls. Thank you again.
I honor him. Thank you. Thank you.
Great. So guys, next we're gonna have Andre Perry from the Brookings Institute. He has his latest book out. It's Know Your Price, Valuing Black Lives and Property,
Sure.
America's Black Cities. Yes, sir, Reverend.
I'm making an appeal. Brother Ron Daniels, Bob Ronwine, and Todd Year are given the details. We need to have as many points. We said, right now, the media is somewhat driving this is a freak show in some instances to line up what our priorities are. For example, we've been pushing this lynching federal crime. We took it to the caucus, and they gave it to Bobby Rush. It's not a bill yet because Ron Paul is stopping it. So the people in Kentucky, that's the assignment, Ron, the lynching bill thing. The second thing is I'm concerned that we got 4 acres of the mule in some instances because we didn't have protection of rights. We were terrorized off the land, killed on the land, driven north by the trail of tears for Indians and trail of blood for blacks. And so I want Ron and Todd and Bob begin to put 1, 2, 3 to numerous things. The other thing is that 401 years of race supremacy. Anybody swimming that water 40 years can't say they're dry. First built on race supremacy and black inferiority. Problem is we learned our lesson too well. Many of us accepted the black inferiority definition. The very nice that we overcoming our inferiority status. And white people having from 7/5, 3/5, they have to adjust the 5-5 ratio. So I really want Brother Todd, Yuri, and Daniels and Barbara Brewers on what are 8 to 10 points, so we have an agenda. Because people marching every place, they're saying things, but Ron, they're not coherent in sense of we always had a demand structure.
Greatly appreciate it, Reverend. Thank you for that. And as I was mentioning, we're going to go ahead and go to Dr. Perry. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Perry. We greatly appreciate it.
It's Sheila again saying, I'm sorry,
yes,
it's Reagan Flowers. Reagan, I didn't see the picture.
Yes, Reagan is on. Reagan is going to go after Dr. Perry.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I just called her name incorrectly, so thank you.
Oh, okay. No worries.
Daniels, I love you. Thanks.
Yeah,
Dr. Perry?
Yeah, so maybe I'll just go. Well, thank you, Reverend Jackson, for having me. You've been an inspiration and a leader in the area that I'm going to talk about today, and that's the economic impacts of racism all throughout the history and what is happening today. In my new book, Know Your Price, I examined housing prices in Black neighborhoods and compared them to areas in the country where the share of the Black population is less than 1%. And I controlled for education, crime, walkability, and all those fancy Zillow metrics, so I could get a sense of an apples to apples comparison between homes in Black neighborhoods and white neighborhoods. Now, homes in Black neighborhoods are undervalued by 23%, about $48,000 per home. Accumulatively, that's about $156 billion in lost equity. And we know that that's a big number. Equities used for people to start businesses, to send their kids to college. It's used by municipalities to fund infrastructure and education and policing. But I just want to give you a little bit of perspective with what that looks like. 156 billion would have funded more than 4 million businesses based on the average amount Blacks use to start up companies. It would have paid for 8 million four-year degrees based on the average amount of a four-year education. It would have replaced the pipes in Flint, Michigan 3,000 times over. It's more than double the cost of the opioid crisis. I mean, it would have covered all of Hurricane Katrina damage. It's a big number. Now, why that's important when in this discussion of reparations? That occurred partially because of the homeowners loans corporations actions in the 30s, moving all the way through even the 70s of redlining neighborhoods that were Black majority. I have several colleagues, Rashawn Ray and I wrote an essay on why the need for reparations that my colleagues actually praise for its articulateness in addressing the problem. But they do not necessarily agree with the approach, largely because they say white Americans aren't ready for reparations. I just want to be clear. If any white person received any kind of relief check for closing a business for 3 months, 3 weeks, whatever, should understand the need for reparations because we've been socially distanced for hundreds of years. That there's no way we're going to educate our way out of the wealth gap. The wealth gap is currently 170,000 roughly for white Americans to 17,000 for Black Americans. Almost 20% of us have zero net wealth. And when we look at wealth as a predictor of health, it's a significant predictor. People without wealth get sick and die faster. And so if we're ever going to close this gap, we need a stimulus package. You can call it reparations, you can call it relief, you can call it whatever you want. But there was an injury done by policy violence inflicted on Black communities specifically that caused financial damage. I'm going to give you another statistic that drove a lot of the writing in the report. I went and scraped Yelp data of businesses all across the country. And we also looked at income and revenue data for businesses all across the country. And what we found may surprise some, but not for Black folk who know businesses. Businesses owned by people of color in Black neighborhoods actually score higher on Yelp, but get less revenue. And this goes to what the elders used to say all the time, at least Dr. Daniels and I grew up in Pittsburgh. We used to hear this all the time growing up. Elders used to say, our ice is just as cold. Some would say other parts of the country, our water's just as wet. The point is, elders understand that if you do not reward quality in a neighborhood in terms of businesses, you distort the market in a way that suppresses economic mobility. Quality businesses in Black neighborhoods are then competing against lower quality businesses. And what we're actually seeing now in the COVID moment, white folks are actually daring to call for delivery to Black businesses because they wouldn't necessarily go to those neighborhoods to get that Jamaican, that jerk chicken or that soul food. But now they're ordering out, and some businesses are benefiting from this arrangement. But I want to underscore why these businesses are not getting the kind of profits they should be. It's largely because these neighborhoods, one, you have housing devaluation where there's less revenue in the neighborhood to spend on infrastructure, and the municipalities are not putting money into everyday services like garbage collection, lights, beautification, and all those other fancy things you see in other neighborhoods. A lot of my research certainly looks at reparations and the past, but my research clearly shows you can put a dollar amount on the injury that is caused today. That 156 billion just in housing came from 2017 data. This is not a accumulation of years. This is just in 2017, 156 billion. And we also have examples of showing how colleges and other businesses benefited from slavery, from Jim Crow, from discriminatory practice of the past. Georgetown University, Brown, and other places have figured out how to pay their reparations. It's past time the federal government issued theirs. Now, I just want to be clear, and I'll point to my colleagues. I work at the Brookings Institution. I'm in concert with other think tanks around the world. We deserve reparation because it's a moral debt. We are owed. It's just like any other debt, you have to pay it. And so I believe in reparations for economic growth, but this is not just about economic growth. This is about unpaid labor. This is about injury, and we should get it, whatever the impact. However, we must also deal with the structural inequality that still exists every day. Wealth is extracted from Black communities simply because Black people are in it. That housing is extracted, businesses are extracted, infrastructure is extracted, and now it's time to return the value that's been extracted by racism. And we can do this. We have the research, we have the ways to name the amounts in various sectors. So I'm going to leave it there, and thank you for having me. Go get Know Your Price, where I detail all of this research on the economic impacts of slavery, Jim Crow, and other areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ray. Greatly appreciate that. Your insight is very helpful for us. And maybe we can, extend that to another town hall at some point. I greatly appreciate working with you guys. It's always good to have you on. Next, we're going to have Reagan Flowers. Reagan Flowers is the Houston Community College trustee. Reagan, would like to hear from you from a Texas perspective on the education level.
Shirley.
Yes, sir.
One of the things, Andre, is that he's shifting us from being fundamental. If there's no money involved, we are creditors, not debtors. That's fundamental. Now that we're owed, we're owed. Since I have a book too, by the way, since he's into the book business.
It's coming up, Reverend. It's coming up.
But listen to Andre, we thank him because we've not always had scholars of this ilk. And they're just committed to the proposition in ways you are now. We thank you and Ray, Barbara Lee, and others. You guys are really coming on strong with your superior education. And I want to thank those who lived in the dark. I keep on talking about Mr. Michaud and others who taught African talk all these years. This is a moment in history we can't miss this moment. I think it's a big deal. I'm overjoyed.
And thank you. And like I said, you laid a path for this work. And actually, Dr. Daniels, I just want to say this quick shout out. I lived in New Orleans for 15 years. I lived during Hurricane Katrina. I saw Jesse come down. I saw Ron Daniels, and he provided New Orleans hope when so many other people abandoned the city. And Black people were forced out. And when we came back, the voices that talked about what we are owed and a Bill of Rights for evacuees, that was Ron Daniels. And I just want to say thank you. I marched with Reverend Jackson. I went to Ron Daniels' sessions. And so I just want to say thank you, because this generation now is our time, but we had people to teach us. So it didn't come out of, I think I'm a handsome, brilliant dude, but I'm not that great. It's because we had greatness before us. So I just stand on the shoulders of greatness. Thank you.
Thank you again, Dr. Perry. Greatly appreciate it. We'll have you back on.
Yeah.
Reagan?
Yes, thank you so much, Shelley. And you guys, you just don't know how humbled and honored I am to be with giants today. I have a story for you. I never could have thought as a little girl growing up in Detroit, running around my great uncle, reparations Ray Jenkins, who I am sure you all know about. And as children, we couldn't understand. What was he talking about? We was always angry. What was the big deal? It was always an argument and a fight going on. And of course, to fast forward now, I couldn't have thought as a little girl that I would be sitting with you guys today and being able to participate in this conversation. And of course, coming out of Detroit and being around, Reparations Ray is who my great uncle became known as in Detroit, that, I would end up moving to the South. And while in Detroit, I didn't know anything about Juneteenth, right? And I moved into Houston, and there was all of this talk about this Juneteenth holiday. And I didn't understand the big deal. I didn't take the time in my college days. I moved to Houston to go to college, Texas Southern University. And so I didn't have the research. I didn't have the understanding. And of course, as life would have it, in my advocacy for Black children to have the quality education they deserve and to participate in the economic opportunity that STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics has to offer our children, I have, done that research, and I've been privileged to be in the rooms with giants like you all. and to see the importance of why Juneteenth is so important to us, and to now better understand my great uncle and what he was fighting for and what the big deal was. Because, you know, from my great uncle, his deal was we were deserving an annuity payment, basically, you know, for slavery, you know, and that it was all fueled from his experience with his grandfather passing, who was, you know, both grandparents were slaves. They were sharecroppers. And when he died, they didn't have money to bury him. They didn't have anything to show for all that work, right? And so we are at a critical moment in history right now. You know, for Juneteenth, for me, it is a time for reflection, but it's also a reminder to us all of the long suffering of Black people. But in spite of that, we continue to live on. We continue to push on. But I tell you, I am all in with you guys. We're going to leverage, you know, each other, and we're going to get out the vote. We're going to do what we have to do, because we're going to have to speak through votes, and we're going to fight. You know, we have to fight for reparations in education. You know, when I listen to, you know, the points that Andre just made about redlining, when you look at the majority of funds that are supporting our schools, it's property taxes. But when you've redlined and you've not allowed us to buy property, and in our communities, our schools have suffered. When you look at the amount of federal dollars that are going into public education, that's about 10% of that budget. We need more. We need our reparations in our schools. We thought that, you know, that we had solved the issue of separate and equal, but we have not solved that issue. And so just thank you so much for all that you are doing, have done, and for allowing me to stand on your shoulders and to continue this work. And I'm just looking forward to just doing more, doing my part with you. Reverend, I just can't tell you how overjoyed I am to be in this space with you. And of course, honoring all that you have done and continue to do through the Rainbow Push Coalition. Thank you.
Thank you, Reagan. We greatly appreciate it. What I'd like to do, Reagan, is to invite you to, well, I'll connect you and Reverend Jeanette Wilson. She's with our Push Excel board. It'd be great for you guys to connect, given the fact that you're on the trustee board for the Houston Community College. So greatly appreciate your input. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And now I'm going to bring on Reverend Dr. Todd Yeary, a lawyer. He is our Senior Vice President of Strategic Planning of Do It All. He is the Bureau Director for our DC office and our Chief Strategist behind Reverend Jackson. So Dr. Yeary, take it away.
Well, good morning to all of you. Thank you, Shelley, for your leadership in coordinating this, to Reverend Jackson for your very steady hand and insight to guide us through some very turbulent times, to all of my brothers and sisters on this call. Some of you I've seen in the last several days as we've gathered to collectively affirm the value and the dignity of those we've lost in the battles in the streets of our country. As we're having this conversation, certainly I want to acknowledge my big brother, Dr. Ron Daniels. I know I owe you a phone call, so I'm gonna make sure I try to get caught up today. We've got a long running list. Here's what I've heard, and certainly to Drs. Andre Perry and Rashawn Ray, my new cousins, who when I drop their name, my value goes up because people think I'm smart by association. So I'm grateful for them. As we think about this agenda, and as Reverend Jackson's been talking, the remedy for reparations is going to have to come by probably a dual track. One is going to be litigation, the other is going to be legislation. And as I've been thinking about it, Big Sister Janice and Sister Barbara, inequality seems to me to be a condition that has a legal construction to it. It is reinforced by law, law having been duly passed by a process, to Barbara Arnwine's point, requires a vote. Only the presidency is an election by a path other than popular vote. And so that means voting does matter when we start looking at legal frameworks, much like in Evanston, Illinois, where the council decided there would be a redirection of city revenues by way of the legalization of marijuana. that there would be a reparations framework that allows for the redirection of those funds. That came by way of a legislative process by those who were elected by the people, those who participated in the process. And so if we're going to look at this, and as Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee mentions about the issue of law, if we don't make this argument, we use the term reparations, but the legal term is actually restitution. And when we look at restitution, restitution requires that you be put in the posture you would have been in had the damage not actually occurred. And so Andre Perry's calculation, the economic framing that allows us to kind of look back over a period of time, when Sister Janice talks about cotton was king, or no, I think it was Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, but cotton was king without the benefit of overhead. There is a calculation that we can certainly do to look at what wages would have been paid at that time, bring them forward, adjust for inflation, and figure out what should be the restitution factor that gets considered in that process. Once we establish there's a legal harm, we got to make sure that we apply this notion. I believe we have a legitimate cause, and Sister Barbara, we need to talk about it. Is there a tort claim that once the Civil War amendments, 13, 14, and 15 went in, the government failed in its duty under the Fifth Amendment, federal law, 14th Amendment applying to the states, that equal protection and due process was not accorded to those who were forcibly enslaved and their descendants. And so the failure to enforce is the breach that leads to the demand for the damages. And that then we can look at all of the calculations. Redlining was a policy, it was not just a practice. Police abuse has been a policy, it has not just been a practice. When we look at the denial of education, it was a policy. There was a Southern Compact that the Southern states had that you could not attend state schools. And so they set aside a fund to be able to pay for students to go to certain private schools in the North. That wasn't just a practice, it was a policy. And so when we look at the policies that the government has duly passed as a violation of its duty to enforce under the principles of equal protection at the federal and the state levels, we've got to make sure that we look at that process seriously and begin to kind of find out where we have test cases that we might begin to pursue in the various state and federal courts to determine what the legal framing is going to be. Because if legislation, that's got to be the other track. That's got to come by the periodic process of elections. But in the meantime, we have to begin to start to put pressure on the legal interpretations of the government's duty. Particularly, we'd have to figure out how we get before 1865 and the Civil War amendments. But I think as a starting point, that's where we have a codifying of the duty principle that we should explore. That said, Reverend Jackson, in Keeping Hope Alive, has given us reminders of how he has framed the inspiration for moments just like this. This is one of those moments where we're walking in uncharted territory, navigating in times we have not anticipated, when we see all of the conflicts between what we say we are and who we really are. When a president will go to Tulsa, Oklahoma to rally, it's not a dog whistle anymore, it's a bullhorn. He is starting to rally the dinosaurs in the museum called Southern racism because he's trying to bring them back. Let's not be misled here, that this is the precursor to a setup that is leading to a conflict that he is anticipating losing in November, but he's not going to leave office without a fight. And that fight is going to be fueled in the streets around this country. And it is going to be led violently simply by the words that he is using as the rhetorical Molotov cocktail to fuel and fan the flames of institutional and structural racism. So I'm just glad that we're having this conversation. Reverend, thank you for this assignment to work with Big Brother Ron Daniels, Big Sister Barbara Armwine, and Lottie Dottie and everybody to work on how we lay out what our agenda is as a starting point, not as a final point, so we can begin by way of litigation, legislation, and then also agitation to push for reparations today.
Thank you, Dr. Yuri. Reverend Jackson, we'd like to have you to give final final thoughts?
Well,
Oh, and Dr. Daniels. Okay.
I'm overjoyed at this session. I said I want Brother Daniels and Bob Brownwine and Todd to work on prioritizing these. We keep driving these gems, you know, and for example, lynching be a further crime. It fits somewhere in the scheme of things. Secondly, the idea that whites were taught to be superior and we'd be inferior. We both learned our lessons well. We learned to be inferior. We just, some of us just breaking out of that, you know. The whites who swim in the ocean of race supremacy are all racist. They believe they're supreme. A few try to swim upstream, but anybody brought up in 40 years of this have notion that they're superior by privilege and inheritance. Some time ago, I was saying we had trying to get a black car dealership in Harlem, and so finally GM had a compact with Potemkin Motors. They issued the territories of car dealerships before we had the right to vote. Southern New York and Northern Jersey owned by Potemkin. They finally allowed them to put a Chevrolet dealership there. At that meeting where the black guy was about to become the dealer, Mr. Ty had his little grandchildren there. They were just taking pictures and all that. I think you were there, Janice. But those children at 5 own 7 car dealerships. Inheritance and access. That's why fighting the police is patrolling. Controlling is a different set of rules, inheritance and access and laws of perpetuity. We got to have a Wall Street meeting, Detroit and all of them, Silicon Valley meeting. If we just stop at police behavior, kind of nice and gentle police is not the answer to our problem. They should be kind and gentle, they should be civilized. And we should get all the go to police being civil. Mandela did not go to jail 27 years to get kind of gentle police, but the end of the apartheid system. And really the Plessy decision is an apartheid law. And all that happened certainly since 1896 is that. I'm concerned about, my father would have been 115 today. His mother was in slavery. Grandmother, so I'm 30 or 40 years out of slavery. This ain't but so far you go. Nearly there. I'm 40 years out of slavery. So I really want you guys to work on that. The last point would be this, before I bring on Ron to close us out, is that 13th Amendment has a hell of a flaw in it, except those who are in prison. Like all the liberal speed, they took that clause and built a whole prison complex, Angola prisons, Parchment prison. They built a whole prison slave system. That whole 13th Amendment, big hole in the 13th Amendment. We're inheriting that today, with every city 3 times more blacks in jail than the population. We never really got free. 13th Amendment did not free us. They really never really got free. When we got the land, the terror. Brian Williams here, Brian, brother down in Montgomery, his name, Brian Stevenson.
Stevenson.
Right, Stevenson.
Brian Stevenson.
We're trying to put a civil rights movement on top of the waste pile of lynching and the federal government and the Confederates. What happened in Tulsa is an example of massacre. Rose was a massacre. Well, the massacre was true. And he has unearthed a lot of that. He has a special place in this agenda. So I'm anxious, I'm excited about being here today. I say simply, police patrol, corporations control. And those who patrol protect those who control. And those who control is where the wealth is. They can decide to give every black people 20% scholarships to these schools. They can decide to build loan portfolios, investment portfolios. the wealth right now is if you give the police, downtown America is not even affected by it, except it's exciting. It kind of goes on with COVID-19. And I'm concerned that we have run an agenda. So there's people they're marching to an agenda. And right now we're marching. It's a dignity. And I'm not putting it down, marching for better police behavior. Most of the marchers have no sense of an agenda for restitution. And I want to thank you, Tal Yuri, one of those guys. He's a PhD and a lawyer and a minister. Andrew, you train people who paid your academic dues. Janice is a trained lawyer. You guys step to the plate. You make all the difference in the world. Many years, most trained people were detached from our struggle. In Greenville, when I grew up, NAACP was considered a communist organization, so teachers couldn't join it. One guy who was an auto mechanic, Mr. Wittenberg, went around saying join NAACP. He got on people's nerves. He finally got a job at the airport, carrying bags. Some people say he didn't want to put them, they didn't want to be bothered him. We've always had some voices, some wheels, some noise makers, and those persons must be raised up now. So I do want to say that I did a book some time ago called Keeping Hope Alive. I want you to get it because I tried to document some of my work during the last years. July 16th, I went to jail in 1960. It would be 60 years, July 16th. That day has meaning for me, but it has meaning for us in South Carolina. Please be a part of that in the book, Keep On Up Alive. We thank you, Shelley Davis. You've done a marvelous job.
Thank you, Reverend. I think you wanted to hop over to Dr. Daniels, and then we'll go back to Barbara for a minute, and then Mark will close this out.
Well, thank you very much. And because at the beginning, I didn't know how much time we had, and I was really relatively brief.
Thank you for that.
But on this issue of reparations, and I want people to listen to me very carefully. The reason why we formed a National African American Reparations Commission was to provide guidance for this conversation. If people will go to the website, reparationscom with 2Ms.com, you will see an amazing group of commissioners, including Mark Thompson. People who have been working on this for years and years and years, and a 10-point program, which mentions reparation Ray and Ray Jenkins in terms of the people who worked on it. One of the points in the 10-point program is that we want to revise the 13th Amendment. It is in the 10-point program. Yeah. But I need my allies and friends to read it, to go to the website and read it, because you don't have to do this work. Barbara Arnwine, you know, I get the messages on the call, but I know that Barbara Linda Dunson's on the call. We have separation and division of labor. We're on this. We are trust us to move this conversation forward. Reverend Yeri, the human rights stuff that you're talking about is built into HR 40. To Sister Janice Mathis, it ain't just about the past. HR 40 is also for all post-emancipation exclusionary policies. It's there. If you go to the website, go to the Reparations Resource Center, you will see that. Evanston, as you know, Reverend Yeri, didn't happen by accident. The National African American Reparations Commission is working with Robin Ruth Simmons to shape it so that it will be a model. So that's not like, that's intentional. We're involved in that. The Juneteenth hearing that happened last year, that was an accident. We were very much involved in helping to shape that. So I'm just ending by saying that we have been, one of the reasons we did the forum last night was to break into the consciousness of even our allies to understand that we have created a framework so that when people are talking about we need to do, we have laid out a comprehensive program for both direct benefits and for community benefits. And when we get HR 40 passed, it means therefore that proposals can come from everybody about that. Because at the end of the day, legalism is fine. I was at the Center for Constitutional Rights. I'm a people's lawyer. It's really going to be about political will. It is going to be about marching on ballot boxes. It's going to be about economic sanctions. We will be able to make this happen by using all of the multifaceted tools in our arsenal. So I just wanted to drop that as I close.
Thank you, Dr. Daniels. Greatly appreciate that. Dr. Arnwine,
Thank you, Shelley. Thanks, everybody. Thanks again for just an amazing program. So much to learn. I can't wait to buy Andre Perry's book. Very excited. A couple just quick points. One is Reverend Jackson, you definitely want to see the Movement for Black Lives vision statement, because in that vision statement, they cover a range of issues, including economic justice, and they support reparations. This vision statement came out, I guess, 4 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago. But it's very important to know what the basis is that the Movement for Black Lives is proposing. Now, there are gaps, without question, in the vision statement. I think there are gaps in a lot of the thinking. I'm surprised that the Justice in Policing Act has nothing on sexual harassment by police and sexual assault by police, when it is the most predatory thing they do towards Black, Native American, and Latino women. There are more complaints about sexual harassment than there are about other misconduct. So we need to, really think about what we're doing here. But in any event, there are gaps, but that statement's pretty good, and I would recommend that that you look at it. The other thing I want to say is that, remember, I've been talking in some of the programs about the decrease in voter registration that occurred because of COVID in March, April, and May. Well, one of the things that's happened is that in the last 2 weeks, in many of the states, there's been a huge uptick in voter registration. Guess who's registering? Young people, 18 to 29. And it's because of the protests. There's no doubt about it. It is protest driven. They've been registering people to vote. They've been very focused on the vote. They got chants about the vote. I've gone to the rallies. I've marched, and they talk about the vote and the criticality of the vote and voting, for these law enforcement positions in particular. So I want us to be clear that, that there is work being done. We just all have to unite on the work. Dr. Yuri, the FHA, there's a great, I believe that a lawsuit against the FHA is absolutely still viable. And I think that that's where, we can trace so much of, what Dr. Perry was talking about, that color law talks about. So there's a lot for us to do. The last point is final, and that is, Dr. Daniels, you mentioned marching to the ballot box. Our joint program of the Rainbow Push Coalition and the Transformative Justice Coalition's Voter Justice Program, our joint program is called Our March.
I know.
Ballot box.
I know.
That's what it's called. And that's what we're about. We're going to march to the ballot box in great defiance, and we're going to get this done. Thank you. Thank you, Shelley.
Thank you, Dr. Armwine.
Senator,
Yes, sir.
Last week, we formally signed a deal with the Cherokees and the Navajos as part of our coalition. 1619 is our date. When Columbus got here closer, around 1419, they were already here. We cannot leave out the Native Americans as been a part of this, the moral authority of our coalition. For example, in Oklahoma, they were advertising in Europe. If you come to America, 500 acres of free land and free labor. America, all resources that was given to them. The Homestead Act is a big deal.
Right.
When we got it, we burned out. Homestead Act is a big piece of it.
That's right.
And those government laws, yes,
absolutely
dealt with that. But I think that as we put this piece together, we're each of us are learning. We're putting light in dark places. We're finding things we just had never studied. I'm excited about this period. Ron, I thank you and Barbara, my stepdaughter. Love you guys so much. Okay.
All right, Mark, take it away.
Well, all right. Let me just update a couple of things that have occurred since then, and I'm sorry I had to step away. I was asked at the last minute to join Joy Reid with Cory Booker and the mother of Amadou Diallo and the mother of Eric Garner, and we talked about reparations, Dr. Daniels. That just happened on television. in the context of this police violence. So that's very important. The conversation is picking up. I should also acknowledge too, another bit of news, for you all who are not aware, the African nations sought a commission of inquiry into systemic racism and police lynching by the UN Commission on Human Rights. Big hearing on that. The State Department could not pressure the African nations. They stood their ground, but they pressured the European nations, backed it down from the Commission of Inquiry into a study and a report. And that's something, but I think it lays the groundwork for some of us have been talking about treating, as you alluded to, Reverend Jackson, America like we had to treat South Africa, meaning shaming this nation for what it's doing to us, and if necessary, calling for a divestment campaign. Ellie Mistel of The Nation magazine, thenation.com, wrote a big piece on divestment that was published just on the 18th. So we invite people to go there and look at that. We want to thank all of the wonderful panelists who started with us and those that remain. Dr. Daniels, Dr. Yeary, Dr. Ellis, Dr. Flowers, Dr. Arnwine, to Reverend Jackson, of course, for having us here, and everyone at the Rainbow, and of course to Shelley Davis, my older brother, for organizing this in the way he has. Let us close appropriately if all minds are clear. God, we ask you to receive in the cradle of your arms those who've passed away from either the coronavirus or the cops' violence. Please comfort and strengthen their loved ones with insurance that the one you sent will bear their burdens and faithfully bring forth justice. Guide us to empty their tombs and resurrect those who've died by continuing our own freedom fighting to change the conditions which caused their deaths. And as we leave each other to go about our respective days, Lord, you are our refuge. Let the ancestors linger to guard our doors and render impassable our very thresholds to virus and violence, to Rona and racism. We call especially the names of Dr. Conrad Worrell once again, and especially also, as we've discussed, reparations, Lord. We're thankful for Reparations Ray as well. We are more than Corona, we're more than the cops, because we're more than conquerors. We stand on the shoulders of our ancestors, and in the name of Jesus Christ, hope of earth and joy of heaven, it is in their names we pray. Amen.
Share that.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Where we go? We're going to go into a period of violence here.
Mhm.
Trump is itching for a race riot.
Yes.
That's what
That's what he's
going to Tulsa is about. It's what going to Florida, where the KKK reign supreme is about. We was very careful during this season about they may have 100,000 people in Tulsa tonight. They anticipate. They watched us march in the last 2 or 3 weeks, and they're itching to get involved in this action. They invaded our ranks with these with throwing bombs. I mean, the people who marched on George Floyd were not violent. The violence came really from was infused. The alt-right invaded the march. We beat them out, got them out of the marches, so they've been non-violent at the time. But we're going through a season of real violence. They really do plan to. I ask people in Tulsa, please stay away from the rally, because they walked into the Michigan legislature with AK-47s. They're gonna shoot some people to provoke a riot, and that would be Trump's card as a nation. Don't be unaware of the fact that we've had a tailwind behind us since George Floyd's death. We're going to face a headwind in terms of violence. Please be aware of that, my friends.
All right. Agreed, Reverend Jackson. Folks, get Reverend Jackson's book, please, Sermons and Speeches, Keeping Hope Alive. We invite you to get that and share it with your loved ones, especially these young people who still can stand to learn even more from the great Reverend Jackson and others who've been involved in this struggle for a long time. Again, thank all of you. God bless you. Be safe.